A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Prashant Kumar Sinha and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Political crisis deepens in Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe offers resignation to make way for all-party government amid nationwide protests. Demonstrators storm into Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's official residence demanding his resignation. Tricolour flown half-mast on day of national mourning across India as a mark of respect to former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Body of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrives in his home city Tokyo. People pay last respects. In Wimbledon tennis, Elina Rybakina clinches women's singles title. Novak Djokovic to take on Nick Kyrgios in men's singles summit clash tomorrow. And in T20 cricket, India thrash England by 49 runs, take unassailable 2-0 lead in 3-match series. Ranil Wickremesinghe today announced his resignation as Prime Minister of Sri Lanka to make way for an all-party government to take over in the country. The Prime Minister's media division said that Prime Minister Wickremesinghe will resign after an all-party government is established and the majority is secured in Parliament. His office had said that Mr. Wickremesinghe will continue as Prime Minister until then. Mr. Wickremesinghe called an emergency meeting with party leaders in order to control the current situation today as the protesters stormed the official residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. According to local media reports, the meeting was also attended by the speaker where the ministers urged Mr. Rajapaksa to tender his resignation in order to stabilize the situation in the country. Amid reports of the president fleeing to some other place, a government spokesperson, Mohana Samaranayake, said he had no information about Mr. Rajapaksa's whereabouts. Earlier this month, newly appointed Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe said the nation was targeting $5 billion for repayments and $1 billion to support the country's reserves. He said that the discussions with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) are currently going on and was optimistic that negotiations would conclude this month. Further, he clarified that the debt restructuring has already begun after the appointment of financial and legal advisors. Thousands of protesters in Colombo stormed the president's official residence and secretariat today amid months of mounting public anger over the country's worst economic crisis in 7 decades. Military personnel and police were unable to hold back the crowd as they chanted slogans asking President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to step down. On the 8th of July, an indefinite curfew was imposed across Sri Lanka's capital and the military placed on alert ahead of a planned rally demanding the ouster of the embattled president. Meanwhile, police fired tear gas at the protesters, but despite that, they entered his house and set the house on fire. Meanwhile, Colombo Municipal Council CMC Fire Brigade said they were informed that the Prime Minister's private residence in Colombo was set on fire and its teams were unable to reach the location due to the unrest, according to Daily Mirror. The nation observed one day of state mourning throughout India today as a mark of respect to former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated at a political campaign in Nara city of Japan yesterday. As a mark of respect for Mr. Abe, the Indian national flag was flown at half-mast on all government buildings where it is flown regularly. Speaking at the first Arun Jaitley Memorial Lecture in New Delhi yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi remembered former Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe and expressed grief over the demise of his friend.
मेरे घनिष्ठ मित्र और जापान के पूर्व प्रधानमंत्री श्री शिंजो आबे अब हमारे बीच नहीं रहे हैं। मेरे लिए अपूरणीय क्षति और असहनीय पीड़ा का दिन है। शिंजो आबे जी मेरे तो साथी थे ही, वो भारत के भी उतने ही विश्वसनीय दोस्त थे। उनके कार्यकाल में भारत जापान में उनके जो राजनीतिक संबंध थे हमारे, वो को नई ऊंचाई तो मिली ही। हमने दोनों देशों की साझी विरासत से जुड़े रिश्तों को भी खूब आगे बढ़ाया। आज भारत के विकास की जो गति है, जापान के सहयोग से हमारे यहाँ जो कार्य हो रहे हैं, इनके जरिए आबे जी भारत के जनमन में सालों तक बसे रहेंगे। मैं एक बार फिर दुखी मन से मेरे दोस्त को श्रद्धांजलि देता हूं।
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar visited Embassy of Japan today to convey his condolences to Ambassador Satoshi Suzuki on the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. In a series of tweets, Dr. Jaishankar said that for more than 2 decades, Shinzo Abe has symbolized a growing relationship between India and Japan. He said Shinzo Abe placed India-Japan ties in a larger global context of the free and open Indo-Pacific. Dr. Jaishankar said that at personal level, he was the very embodiment of grace and consideration. The body of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrived at his home city Tokyo on Saturday, a day after he was fatally assassinated during a campaign speech in the western Japan city of Nara. Police are continuing the interrogation of Tetsuya Yamagami, a 41-year-old resident of Nara City in western Japan who was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder of Abe. According to NHK World, the vehicle carrying Abe's body arrived at his home in the Shibuya district around 1:30 p.m. local time. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also arrived at the home of the assassinated former PM. Local media has reported that a night vigil will be held on Monday and his funeral will be held on Tuesday. International leaders have expressed their sympathies with the family of Abe and have sent tributes expressing outrage and sadness over the killing. Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed his condolences today over the sudden and unfortunate death of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, a day after China gave mixed reactions from different quarters, with Chinese netizens rejoicing and spreading anti-Abe sentiments. Chinese state media reported that in his message of condolence to the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, President Xi said that Abe made 2 positive efforts to improve China-Japan relations. Abe, Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister, was shot down from behind yesterday in the Japanese city of Nara while making a campaign speech for a parliamentary election. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian condoled the demise of former Japanese Prime Minister Abe, saying that China is shocked by Abe's sudden death, while Chinese social media response was sprinkled with glee.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese issued a rare joint statement to mourn the death of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, describing him as a transformative leader for Japan's relations with their countries. They will honor Mr. Abe's memory by enhancing their efforts to ensure a peaceful and prosperous region, they said. The 3 leaders recalled Abe's pioneering work in the establishment of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, which groups Australia, India, Japan and the US, and in pushing a vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific region. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India, Japan and Shinzo Abe. In conversation are Skandaranjan Tayal, and former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which has shocked the world yesterday. And we also saw an outpouring of grief and dismay from world leaders. And we also saw India and the Indian Prime Minister reaching out to the people of Japan and expressing their own dismay over the assassination. Ambassador Tayal, how do you look at this assassination which has shocked the world, especially happening in a country like Japan where normally gun violence is rare, political violence is rare? How do you see all this panning out?
There are 2 issues here. One, as you said, gun violence is rare in Japan, and even this gun which was used was a homemade gun by a 41-year-old man. And political violence is also rare in Japan. That is one part of this whole very tragic development. And the second is that if we look at the post-Second World War history of democratic Japan, it has really not had very strong leaders. In the 70 years or so since, let us say, 1950, Japan has had almost 30 prime ministers. In 72 years since 1950, once the United States occupation forces gave full powers to Japan. And in that, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe led his Liberal Democratic Party to 3 election victories in 2012, 2016 and 2020, and was the longest tenure Prime Minister of Japan In 2 terms, it was almost 9 years. That is one part of his importance to Japan as well as to the world. And the other part is that many Japanese leaders, prime ministers have been very inward looking, that they focus only on Japanese economy, Japanese progress and Japanese prosperity. But Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had a global vision. He very clearly realized that given the trajectory of the growth of China, Japan will not be able to contain China either strategically or economically. And since even in his first term, 2007, he was the first person to promote this concept of confluence of two oceans, which we remember as he spoke in India's parliament, and the concept of Indo-Pacific, concept of Quad. He identified countries and regions where, or those who could be helpful to Japan in Japan's own strategic growth and strategic stability. So he had a very wide vision. He had personal friendships with all the global leaders, and that's why his name is very well known. It's a household name in India, for instance. And that's why we see outpouring of grief from all political parties in India as well as in other parts of the world.
Mr. Pal, we've also seen that Prime Minister Modi tweeted and then he's written extensively about his friendship with Shinzo Abe, and the Prime Minister has also brought into context how the India-Japan relationship also flourished as the friendship between the two leaders. And as you pointed out, Shinzo Abe was also instrumental in bringing or in reviving the Indo-Pacific policy, which we see being discussed and talked about today. And also some commentators have felt that under him, conversation which involved India and Japan much more passionately. Do you agree with this, that Shinzo Abe increasing this strategic dialogue and this friendship between the two nations?
Very much so. India-Japan relations have been very strong since 1950s, but the foundation of the relationship was economic as well as aid-based, because there are a lot of official development assistance from Japan to India, and we all remember metro and so many other things. But with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, even in his first term, when he was Prime Minister in 2007-8, and he came to India, the entire concept of quadrilateral security dialogue was really a Japanese proposal. Then confluence of two oceans, so that he linked Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean security and strategic interests together. Before that, the global term used was Asia Pacific. And now we see more and more the use of the term Indo-Pacific, and again the credit goes to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He also started this practice of annual summits with the Prime Ministers of India. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, they shared a vision for a peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific. They shared a vision for free and independent and open Indo-Pacific and all the oceans. And they also shared a vision that China needs to be contained, otherwise it could become a very destabilizing force for all the democracies of the region. And they had a personal chemistry. Prime Minister Modi and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had this understanding. And even in 24th of May, when our Prime Minister Modi was in Tokyo for the Quad Summit, he took time and he met former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. That shows the high regard which Prime Minister Modi had for late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Mr. Pyle, we also saw that the Quad, and it's a rare gesture by the Quad, we saw a joint statement coming out by the leaders of the Quad, that is the leaders of the US, India and Australia, expressing their dismay over the assassination of ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. One, how significant is the fact that you find the Quad nations standing together in their grief, for the assassination of Shinzo Abe. And two, as you yourself mentioned, Shinzo Abe was one of those first leaders who realized the potential that China had to grow aggressively, and that was one of the reasons he pushed for the Quad. And he was also very outspoken, and in his policies it was quite clear that he wanted countries to come together to counter an increasingly aggressive China. How do you see the Quad statement?
The statement by the leaders of Quad, Australian Prime Minister and Japanese Prime Minister, President Joe Biden and our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is a recognition of the fact that this Quad security dialogue really has been initiated by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. In his first term, it did not gather much steam, but in his second term, it became a very potent force in the Indo-Pacific region. And if we look at the worldview of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the kind of policies he was trying to implement in Japan and through their ties, there are 3-4 points which are very important, and Quad would welcome if those policies are continued. One, that Japan will keep on increasing their defense spending. And two, that Japan will get more active in regional alliances. Like Quad is like a regional security dialogue. Then we saw that Prime Minister Kishida participated in the NATO summit in Madrid on 29-30 June. So Prime Minister Abe also wanted that Japan should share more military responsibility in the region, and he wanted that Japan should expand relations with other major democratic powers of Indo-Pacific, India and Australia. And that is his legacy, and Quad leaders would very much appreciate if the future leadership of Japan continues on this path. And of course, we all know that Prime Minister Abe was keen to amend the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which restricts Japan's defense exposure. And in 2015, Prime Minister Abe's cabinet and Diet had authorized overseas combat missions for the Japanese self-defense forces, for collective self-defense. So in many ways, the Prime Minister Abe was pursuing a policy in which the Japanese self-defense forces would have become stronger and would have become more active in cooperating with the forces of friendly countries, allied countries, for the collective self-defense of not only Japan, but the Indo-Pacific region. And that is the legacy the Quad members would like the new leadership of Japan to continue.
Versatile, we also see that India declared one day of national mourning today over the assassination of Shinzo Abe. And that also shows India's deep dismay and grief at the assassination which took place yesterday. Versatile, how do you see going forward? Do you feel that what we call Abenomics, or the fact that Shinzo Abe is one of those first post-Second World War prime ministers of Japan who sought to change the pacifist attitude of Japan, he sought to increase the defense budget. Do you feel that going forward, Abe's legacy or the policies that he brought in, tried to bring in, will also affect the Japanese domestic policies and Japan's relationship with other nations in the years to come?
The foundation of India-Japan friendship of today is a very strong sense of friendship between the people of India, the masses of India, and the people of Japan. We very remember and salute, Subhash Chandra Bose's association with Japan and all that. Then India never sought any war reparations from Japan, and Buddhist connection is there. So there are many points where in history where people of Japan have stood by India and people of India have stood by Japan. So that is a very strong foundation. We have no baggage of history. For instance, many Japanese before the Second World War had colonized many Asian countries, and they have some negative sentiments towards Japan. But people of India are very friendly towards Japan. And then in the journey of growth and development of India, Japan has been a very strong partner. We all remember Maruti Suzuki car, Delhi Metro, millions of people use every day. Now this high-speed train which is being constructed between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, as well as the freight corridors. So Japan is trying to strengthen India's infrastructure so that become Atmanirbhar, so that we have our own Make in India. So it is not just a commercial relationship which Japan and Japanese companies have with India. And that vision, that roadmap was really prepared in the mind of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which Japan is following. And that's why we see this acknowledgement of his role, and we share the grief of the people of Japan, and that's why the flag was lowered for today, and people of India are genuinely grieving on this very tragic and timely loss of a leader of not only Japan but of the region and the world.
Ambassador Payal, when we look forward now after the Shinzo Abe assassination and we look forward at the India-Japan relationship, how do you feel this relationship going forward can strengthen, or it can build on the foundations that Shinzo Abe laid as the Japanese Prime Minister?
What former Prime Minister late Shinzo Abe did with India's leadership, and particularly in the last 7-8 years, is to build both a strategic relationship with India as well as strengthen much more the economic relationship, the trade relationship. For the first time, we have now a civil nuclear agreement with Japan. Earlier, Japan was not ready to sign the civil nuclear deal with India, as India is a non-signatory for the non-proliferation treaty. But going forward, Japan and India need to work together on how to strengthen peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, how to work together in the format of Quad security dialogue, so that more and more democratic countries of Indo-Pacific become associated with this dialogue, and also how more Japanese investment can come to India, because for India a major problem, major challenge is employment generation for our youth, and Prime Minister Abe was really pushing Japanese companies to invest in India more and more, and we hope that the government support, the government push for relocating Japanese companies from say China to other countries, particularly to India, would continue, and that will in the long term strengthen India's economy and will also make the democratic countries of Indo-Pacific, of Asia, stronger, bringing India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, etc. together.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-Japan relationship. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates on the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi today met Professor of Economics and Government at London School of Economics, Nicholas Stern, in New Delhi and discussed diverse issues. In a tweet, Mr. Modi said his passion towards the environment and nuanced understanding of policy-related issues is admirable. Mr. Modi said Professor Stern is also optimistic about India and believes in the skills of 130 crore Indians. Former British Finance Minister Rishi Sonak has launched his bid to become the next UK Prime Minister following Boris Johnson's resignation the previous day. In a campaign video released on Twitter, Sonak said, "Someone has to take grip of the moment and make the right decisions. That's why I'm standing to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and your Prime Minister." If 49-year-old Rishi Sonak wins the top seat, he will be the first Indian origin man to be British Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's grandparents came from Punjab.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address a natural farming conclave through video conferencing tomorrow. The conclave is being organized at Surat in Gujarat. It will witness participation of thousands of farmers and all other stakeholders who have made adoption of natural farming in Surat a success story. As part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Mr. Modi, in his address at Gujarat Panchayat Mahasammelan in March this year, had exhorted consequently at least 75 farmers were identified in each Gram Panchayat and were motivated and trained to undertake natural farming. The farmers were trained in 90 different clusters, resulting in training of more than 41,000 farmers across the district. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate and lay foundation stone of various development projects worth more than 16,000 crore rupees at Deoghar in Jharkhand on 12th of this month. These projects will boost infrastructure development, enhancing connectivity, and give an impetus to ease of living in the region. It will also help in significantly improving socio-economic prosperity in the region. The Prime Minister will inaugurate the Deoghar Airport to provide direct connectivity to Baba Baidinath Dham.
Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu said that the new national education policy is a very good step in the right direction and it should be honoured and implemented in letter and spirit. Addressing the Platinum Jubilee celebration of Mount Carmel College in Bengaluru today, he said that the new education policy is also giving importance to mother tongue. Primary basic education must be in mother tongue because it is easy to understand, grasp and communicate. He advised students to learn as many languages as possible. Stressing upon women's education, Mr. Naidu said that 50% of the population are women and they should be given equal rights, place and opportunity for their empowerment. Women's education needs to be further supported by the government.
A multi-agency search and rescue operation is underway following yesterday's cloudburst at Sri Nashji Shrine in Jammu and Kashmir. Search and rescue operations are being carried out by J&K Police, NDRF, ITBP and Army personnel. The cloudburst, which occurred last evening, led to flash flood near the holy cave shrine of Sri Nashji. Water came from above and sides of the cave after heavy rains at the upper reaches. The number of fatalities in the wake of the incident has now risen to 15. The deceased include 7 men and 6 women, while other 2 bodies are yet to be identified. About 65 people got injured in the incident, out of which 2 have been taken out from the debris alive and are being treated in the hospital. President Ramnath Kovind and Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu have extended greetings to the people of the country on the eve of Eid-ul-Zuha. In his message, the President said the festival of Eid-ul-Zuha is a symbol of sacrifice and service to the humanity. He said this festival inspires people to follow the path of self-sacrifice shown by Hazrat Ibrahim. In a message, Mr. Naidu said that Eid-ul-Zuha epitomizes the spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, and it is an occasion to share in care and show compassion towards the needy and poor.
Security has been beefed up in Bangladesh for peaceful Eid-ul-Azha celebrations. The Bangladesh authorities have beefed up security in the country to ensure a peaceful Eid-ul-Azha celebration on Sunday. The Rapid Action Battalion RAB has taken several measures ahead of the Eid celebrations for smooth celebration of Eid across the country. Briefing media in Dhaka on Saturday, Additional Director General of the RAB, Colonel Muhammad Kumrul Hassan, said that though there is no specific input about terror attack, the force is not leaving anything to chance. In cricket, India took an unassailable 2-0 lead in the 3-match series after beating England by 49 runs in the second T20 International at Edgbaston in Birmingham today. Chasing a target of 171 runs, England were bowled out for 121 in 17 overs, with Bhuvneshwar Kumar taking 3 wickets. Bhuvneshwar Kumar was declared player of the match.
In Wimbledon tennis, 17th seed Elena Rybakina of Kazakhstan has clinched the women's single title, defeating 3rd seed Onis Jabeur of Tunisia in the final 3-6, 6-2, 6-2 this evening. Elena has become the first tennis player from Kazakhstan to win a Grand Slam singles championship. In men's singles, top seed Novak Djokovic will take on Australian Nick Kyrgios in summit clash tomorrow. The Serbian tennis star Djokovic defeated Cameron Norrie in the semi-final yesterday. Earlier, Kyrgios reached his first Grand Slam final when Rafael Nadal withdrew from the tournament due to injury. Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes, Japan probes motive for Abe assassination as police chief admits problems. New York Times notes Elon Musk moves to end $44 billion deal to buy Twitter. The Wall Street Journal writes, Twitter faces renewed questions on path ahead as Elon Musk tries to abandon deal. Financial Times writes, Sri Lankan Prime Minister quits as protesters storm presidential residence. South China Morning Post reports faster daily COVID PCR tests could replace Hong Kong hotel quarantine.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Political crisis deepens in Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe offers resignation to make way for all-party government amid nationwide protests. Demonstrators storm into Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's official residence demanding his resignation. tricolour flown at half-mast on day of national mourning across India as a mark of respect to former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Body of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrives in his home city of Tokyo. People pay last respect. In Wimbledon tennis, Elena Rybakina clinches women's singles title. Novak Djokovic to take on Nick Kyrgios in men's singles summit clash tomorrow. And in T20 cricket, India thrash England by 49 runs, take unassailable 2-0 lead in 3-match series. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of the World News.